Welcome to another Foundation Law Committee program, Police Encounters, Know Your Rights. The Foundation Law Committee is part of the Brooklyn Bar Association, and it is the committee that is dedicated to providing programs for the public. I see in the audience attorneys, legal interns, and judges. There's no CLE for this, as all the attendees are told beforehand. It's really a program that is geared to the public. But of course, all members of the bar and the judiciary are always welcome and invited, and we're thrilled to have you here. Tonight we have a wonderful program. Most of these programs are in the form of Know Your Rights. We do an elder law program. We do matrimonial programs, community-based programs, consumer bankruptcy, and debt programs. And we do all different programs that we can bring to the public to tell you your rights, where you may have a question. While this is not a forum for you to be asking a question regarding your own particular needs, you could come and get a broad base of knowledge from the attorneys that are presenting. So everybody who has signed in, and anybody who's on Facebook live watching now or will be watching later, if you give us your information, we'll put you on a contact list. You'll get notice of all future programs. So tonight we are very privileged to have Brooklyn Defender Services here with us doing the presentations. We have Amanda Jack, a senior trial attorney at Brooklyn Defender Services. Amanda is a proud graduate of CUNY Law School, where she was educated under the philosophy of law and the service of human needs. She received her bachelor's degree from Boston College in 2002, and after Boston College, Amanda moved to Texas, where she worked to organize with the migrant day laborer community, later working on statewide criminal justice reform efforts with the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. She then went to Colombia, where she spent 2 years as a human rights accompanier, living in a rural farming community caught in the intersection of the drug war. Since moving to New York City, she's been active with the National Lawyers Guild, Court Watch at NYC, and has helped to coordinate 5 Borough Defenders, an association of public defenders working to coordinate advocacy and action across the city on behalf of the civil rights of indigent New Yorkers. Maurice Crawford is a Brooklyn native. He has been working within the public defense for 13 years and has spent the last 6 years at Brooklyn Defender Services. At Brooklyn Defenders, he first started working in Supreme Court assisting the attorneys, and then worked as an investigator, investigating mainly criminal cases and some family court cases. He is now currently working in their newly opened community office as a community outreach coordinator. And finally, Hashim Collier is an adolescent social worker at BDS. He was born in Harlem, graduated from Rice High School, and received his bachelor's degree from Virginia State University and then Radford University's School of Social Work, where he worked as a substance abuse counselor. And he created programs for minority groups on campus and conducted research on the success and risk factors for African American males attending predominantly white institutions. He was awarded his Master's of Social Work in 2016. So in this 1.5 hour presentation, we have 3 highly credentialed, experienced, and hearted people in this field. I think you're going to learn a lot from them. A little housekeeping first. Men's room is on the 2nd floor, ladies' room on the 3rd floor. Please try to hold questions to the end. There's so much material to get through, and enjoy the presentation.
So my name's Amanda. I do work at BDS, and I'm really happy to be here with 2 of my colleagues and have a 3rd colleague in the audience. One of our investigators is here with us tonight, Danielle. And we have developed and are developing a Know Your Rights presentation for the community, members such as yourself, and also to use out of our community office where Maurice works. One of the complaints we get as public defenders is that we only meet our clients when they're coming through the system, right? And we don't ever get out in the community and do any kind of proactive education or just community building with one another. So we're very excited to be taking this program out beyond just downtown Brooklyn and out to where many of our members actually are. All right, so the important thing to talk about tonight before we get started is that we're not going to be answering specific questions. This isn't a free legal advice hour about what to do if you're in charge of the criminal charge here in Brooklyn. We're here to talk about some very specific rights. And we come at that from an organization that is a public defender organization, one that has grown quite greatly in recent years, one that has been trying to engage more and more with the public, and one that also realizes that right now some of the most urgent rights matters that we're dealing with are actually in the immigrant community. I'm sure most of you have heard about the ICE coming and making arrests at our courthouses, going to our clients' homes. The arrests have just magnificently increased in this Trump administration. So we're going to give a pretty specific, straightforward street law presentation, which is just very non-specific, the rights everybody has, whether you're a citizen, whether you're not a citizen, what you can expect in encounters with New York City police, and what your rights are in those encounters, all right? We also want to just talk a little bit about, our next slide, what rights we're going to focus on. So to try to distill this, right, because every encounter that you might have with a police officer is going to be different, right? There's no boilerplate how this goes for the most part. So we're going to talk about conversation, detention, and arrest. And we choose this framework because this is also pulled from the legal framework of street encounter and the jurisprudence, the law around what happens when you have been stopped by officers on the street. One of the things that we talk about, and I want to make really clear too, the three of us all come from very different backgrounds, right? I didn't grow up in New York City. I'm a white woman walking around. I have a very different experience with police encounters and stops on the street than my colleagues here do, right? As native New Yorkers from the city to young black men. So we want to be very careful about that. We ask you all to really hold that as we ask you to share too, to please speak from the I and to come from your own experiences. And to know that there is no way that we can ever predict a boilerplate experience for anyone, but we are going to talk about what generally can happen, what the police can do in these three different levels. Okay. All right, before we're going to, actually, let me go back to this slide. So we're going to ask you guys to kind of participate a bit. Do you feel okay about getting up and moving around right now, or would you rather do hand raising? Can we move around a bit? We have an exercise. Yeah? All right. All right. We have, so we're gonna, where do we put this? We're gonna ask just a series of some questions because one of the things we like to understand is where people stand on things. So I know that this isn't going to be captured totally on the live stream, we apologize, but Maurice and Haishim are going to go to either side of the room.
I'll get that.
And I'm just going to put some phrases out there, and we can ask everyone to stand up. And the idea is that Maurice has strongly agree, Haishim has strongly disagree. So I'm going to just put some phrases out there, and you might strongly agree, you'll go all the way over to Maurice on that side. You might strongly disagree, you'll go all the way to Haishim, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. Maybe you're neutral and you're staying in the middle. Maybe you kind of agree. So kind of choose where you are. You don't have to explain your position. It's just something that we like to use to kind of get us up and moving and to understand where the room is too when we're talking about police encounters, okay? So how about this? I feel safe in my neighborhood. If you strongly agree, go towards where Maurice is. If you strongly disagree, over to Haishim, somewhere in the middle. Okay, so most of the room, and this is if you're able and willing and feeling comfortable, is over at strongly agree. Does anyone on this side want to give voice to why they're standing over at strongly agree?
I live on a block that has 3 retired police officers living on it.
Okay, so the fact that those men are there or women make you feel safer. Okay, anyone else? Sure.
I live in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and they're up, they have synagogue on the weekend up like 2 a.m., and there's a lot of people going around. And I know they also have their own police force in that neighborhood, so I can...
Right, so you're a Jane Jacobs fellow too. People on the street makes neighborhoods safer. All right, and how about anyone over here? You don't have to say anything, but... Right, so that was kind of building on a lot of people in this street. What happens when you don't know who those people are and you don't know your neighbors anymore? That can change your feeling of safety. Anyone in the middle want to talk? Okay, let's go to the next one. The police in my neighborhood are there to protect me. If you strongly agree, stay over here with Maurice. If you're somewhere closer to disagree or in the middle. The police in my neighborhood are there to protect me. Would anyone like to share if they've moved or if they stayed? Sure, go ahead, please, sir.
While they're there to protect us, they take too long at times to respond.
They take too long to respond?
Yeah, most of my encounters or my friends' encounters with police have always been bad. I mean, usually we have to go through them and help to go through them, but other than that, it's kind of sad actually.
Yeah, so you feel when something's happening, you're not getting a fast response?
Yeah, there's no connection with them, we don't feel connected. I live by the precinct, which is supposed to be the safest precinct in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
I live very close to it, but there's no connection between us and the cops in our neighborhood. It kind of sucks.
So not just a disconnect with neighbors, but a disconnect with the police who used to do more
Yeah,
neighborhood
there's no
policing.
connect with my neighbors, me personally, but with the police, not so much, and like I said, it sucks, because it's supposed to protect and serve us, and I don't think a lot of people are like that.
That's why you're there. Anyone else on the other side want to say anything? Can do another one? All right, how about adults and youth have equal power in my neighborhood? Adults and youth have equal power. It's what you personally feel. Don't worry about representing your whole neighborhood. So we have some movement happening again. Anyone feel they want to say anything? This is also just about taking note of where people are in the room, right? And the experiences we've all kind of lived through. Anyone want to share on that? Okay, let's do, I have had an encounter with a police officer. I personally have had an encounter with a police officer. Good, bad, neutral, happy. Maybe you are a police officer. You have a daily encounter with a police officer. They're looking in the mirror. Okay, for New York City residents, I think most of us would be over on that I've had an encounter, right? Okay, that makes sense. How about people should be arrested for violent behavior? Strongly agrees over on this side. Violent behavior.
I guess that's subjective to what falls under that?
Yeah, I like that, okay. If you would feel that the person has been violent toward you, should that person be arrested? That's a good, thank you for that reframing. Right, so most folks over here, anyone? Sure.
Just to clarify, sometimes they're mentally ill and then arrested is not necessarily the right thing.
Sure.
Still have to be arrested.
Well, they have to be stopped. But
Does
they
it-
don't necessarily have to have handcuffs put on them and thrown to the ground and not be able to breathe at your head, so that's my policy.
Does anybody know the largest mental health institution in New York State? Rikers Island. Okay, so how about police in my neighborhood abuse their power at times? Police in my neighborhood abuse their power. Okay, so we have a shift again. Does anyone want to voice why they moved, or if we can just kind of note the shift to the either neutral center, or some folks are over to strongly
What was it again?
disagree. Police in my neighborhood abuse their power. Okay, so this is we're pretty spread out on this one. All right, and then how about one of my favorites as a defense attorney? Innocent people can be arrested. Do you agree with that statement or not? Do you think an innocent person can be arrested? Good job. Keep moving now. What's the basic tenet of our criminal justice system? Right? Innocent until proven guilty. All right, I like it. Well done. You guys passed that test. And how about this? How about stop and frisk? The practice of stop and frisk reduces crime and keeps people safer. Do you agree or disagree with that? Stop and frisk reduces crime and keeps people safer. Anyone want to, this is our last one. Does anyone want to give some feedback on this, or why you moved? Or?
I'm not a police officer, but I thought it was stop questioning frisk.
Stop, question, and frisk. It's supposed to be. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Stop, question, and frisk keeps people safer. That's what we're asking. Okay. Well, that is the good segue. So we'll stop there. And I think thank you for you guys, and thank you for sharing too.
Okay, so we're gonna get into like a little discussion here with the room. We're gonna ask some questions and get a little response back from you guys. How many of us have ever had some interaction with the police? You can raise your hand.
What do you see the police doing in your community? What are your experiences of the police? What do we know about stop and frisk in New York City?
So that was 3 questions?
Yeah. Well, I just want you guys to think about those, and then we can start with the first one. So what do you see your police doing in your community?
I
Giving
have
tickets. Okay. In the back?
Yes, I have a question. Your question is, like there's a precedent and in the past. In my neighborhood in the past, they're very, fair to the, neighborhood, very protective.
Yeah.
Not anymore. So I would
Not
like
anymore.
to say precedent, you should be questioning like in the past or in the present.
Okay. So before they used to be really,
Yes, no doubt about it, you could depend on them, very fairly.
but now not so much.
Not only so much, not anymore.
Oh, at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only that you can't even like, other police that you able to depend on them and talking to them.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Like I should trust them. You know what I mean?
So there's a lack of trust since it was the
Yes,
president.
very lack of trust in them.
Got you. So this question that we're answering is, what do you see the police doing in your community? Then we can go to the next one.
What are your experiences of the police?
So it's the same question. I mean, this is a lot has changed, right? There's been a lot of change in police staffing and the number of arrests in New York City in the past decade. So we're just trying to get at if you guys see police interacting with your neighbors, with yourself. I mean, ticketing, right? We definitely see ticketing. I see double parking in the bike lane when I'm biking. And start with it. What are other experiences that people have had?
So the experience is if the police ask you to submit your ID or something and you go, hey, I know my rights, I don't have to do it, then they get really aggressive, then they will say, did you raise your hand against me? Are you threatening me? And they will try to charge you with social justice or just something just so that, to show that, hey, I have power over you, you better comply. And I've seen that a lot.
So did everyone hear that answer? It was about like when you do assert your rights, sometimes that can actually flip the script and get you ended up in handcuffs, right? So people have had that experience, and certainly we've seen that in public on YouTube too.
I see them running red lights a lot.
Running red lights, yeah. With the red lights on sometimes, right? The turret's on.
I guess it depends on your neighborhood. I mean, in our neighborhood, the population has increased, so obviously one would expect that the response time to 20 calls takes that much longer, where before it was a lot more quicker. So the interaction one-on-one is actually a lot fewer because they're answering more calls. I do see them a lot more active. Like last week, I guess they were looking for somebody, and you could tell they were flashing lights and they were going around. So, I mean, you have to take things into consideration as to what you see and based on what reason. And I've never seen a police officer give a ticket other than traffic.
Okay. So to the last question, what do you guys know about stop and frisk?
Stop questioning, Chris.
Stop, question, and frisk, of course.
I would tell you this only because I try to follow this stuff for many, many years. And the fact that is that they do concentrate more on neighborhoods where it's, what's the best way to say it, shady? And I live 2 blocks away from a train station where it was, from one of the police officers who told me, this is the #1 911 call train station in New York City, I guess 2 years ago. And that's where they had the zombie land, I guess, 2 years ago, with the tainted heroin. So, me, I'm glad that they're doing it. But that's 2 blocks from my neighborhood. My block is fairly quiet, but it's getting a lot more heavier traffic at night. And for the first time, I was actually waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was 2 knuckleheads trying to fight each other, and they ended up being friends.
Okay.
In the Bronx County, 2 years ago, I was at a red light, and I made an observation where an unmarked vehicle made a U-turn and pulled over 3 teenagers at the nearby high school. 3 teenagers, they were minorities.
Yes.
Walking, and this particular unmarked vehicle pulled over, and some officers came out plain clothes and pushed the teenagers against the wall and searched them and looked at ID and got back in their vehicle and drove away. And based on the teenagers' behavior, they were shocked.
Yeah.
They because they feel they have no reason for them to do that. And I observed that, at a red light. I saw that and I found that, that was inappropriate and unlawful to a certain extent.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take maybe one more comment.
So I know that's implied kind of a lot more towards men than women. If you go on the subway, you see them have the booths. Almost never seen stop a woman. But every time you see them pick out a guy occasionally, and then then next it goes by ethnicity. So if you look a certain way, if you're younger, if you look like you might be some of the minorities that they stereotype that they should look at, then they will stop.
So that's kind of what we wanted to get at. We're a couple years down the line, right? But there was a big lawsuit. Do people know about the lawsuit? It was called Floyd v. New York, and the subject matter was about stop, question, and frisk. I'm going to call it stop and frisk because in my experience, there aren't a lot of questions in between. As an attorney, you usually go straight to a stop, to a pat down. But this was something that we read about in the news all the time that affected us as New Yorkers. I never have been stopped and frisked as a white woman walking down the streets of New York City, but most of my clients have been. That's how they end up being my clients too. And I've also seen it happen, much like you said, sir. I've seen it happen to other folks. And I think what's happened since the height of stop and frisk in 2011 is, of course, the prevalence of smartphones. And so we're also seeing this just nationwide, what happens with police stops, and especially police stops that go wrong and end up with someone shot or hurt in some way. But what we're talking about is the practice that was in play for many years, which was just stopping people in communities of color. It wasn't necessarily because there was more high crime. It was communities that were predominantly Black and Latino. And of course, now what we're dealing with is immigrant communities and courthouses, right? People getting stopped outside. So you can see the graph that we put up there. That's just kind of to show it. There's been an incredible decrease since Floyd. So the numbers always come out a little bit later. So in 2016, for the whole year, you can see that people were stopped 12,000 times. At the height of it, we're talking like 685,000 stops in 1 year in 2011. And so there were a lot of stories out there about Black men living in Harlem, where this young man went to school, high school, who were stopped 3, 5, 12, 27 times in a year. And I'm not saying stopped and arrested, it's what you saw with those teenagers, where it was stopped, no reason, no probable cause to arrest, and they got to walk on. So one of the things we want to talk about is what happens when you assert your rights in those situations, why that might be safe, why that might not be safe. That might depend a lot on how you identify or how you're perceived in the world too. But we know it's still going on. And the numbers up here about innocence, right? And by innocent, I mean that everyone stopped and arrested is innocent, presumed innocent, right? But what we mean by that is what you saw. Those 3 teenagers were let go, right? They weren't brought down to the precinct for questioning. No contraband was found in them. There was no attorney like me who can then later say that was an illegal stop, that shouldn't have happened. They were let go. So these are the numbers, and they're still pretty stark. Yes, there's been an incredible drop in this practice. I think general wisdom is that NYPD has been trying to move back toward community policing, which is knowing the neighborhood and knowing the neighbors. Those have been all the funding initiatives in the past couple of years from the city council and the mayor's office. But as we can see, the numbers we have still show that large amounts of the people that are actually stopped are then moved along, right? And what is that doing to the fabric of our communities? And what kinds of answers would people in those situations have when we ask the questions we just asked you all to do strongly agree with or strongly disagree? So that's why we think that this kind of a presentation and knowing our rights is so important. And that's we wanted everyone to understand where we're coming from as a defense organization and also as New Yorkers, right? And we each have very different views of what's happening, and we all live in different neighborhoods that are made up of different wonderfully diverse and sometimes not as diverse pockets, right? But that's where we're coming from. So this is just something that was actually in the paper. I put a link up. This was just the New York Times, I think 2 weeks ago, talking about the complaints that it's received and tracking. So there are a lot of protections put in place. There's a lot of things that are still not like under negotiating and trying to happen. But one of this is about tracking police misconduct in these situations when people are stopped for no reason and stopped over and over for no other reason than the color of their skin. Now we're going to get to the meat of it. All right, and As Fern said in the beginning too, I'm sure there might be lots of specific questions that come up. If there's something quick and we can answer it, please bring it up, or maybe you have a different viewpoint, we welcome that as well, right? We all have different lived experiences, but we're gonna talk about why we think it's so important to know your rights vis-a-vis stop and frisk, all right? And it's important to say that Floyd did not hold that case. The Floyd v. New York did not end stop and frisk. It wasn't like you can no longer use stop and frisk. That's a police tactic that's been used for years and just was really kind of glommed onto by past administrations. It just said that the way the NYPD was doing it was illegal. And what made it illegal was the targeting of minority populations, all right? So we're gonna talk about our rights now, just with that in the background, and knowing that it's fallen from 168,000 stops a year just 7 years ago down to like 12,000 last year, right? That's a big leap, and from at least a defense perspective, we think that's an improvement. But we also think that the police are also becoming, I think, more aware of cameras on them, of this having been in the news, and of what happens when you continually stop people with no results. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's been decreasing too. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna talk about the first level, right?
How is that number determined? Like, how do you say it's the 12,000 or the 600?
There's a report that the police are supposed to fill out after they stop someone, and those reports then are viewed by, I think NYCLU's been doing the reporting, like going through the reports, but those numbers are just generated by what's been self-reported by NYPD. So the conventional wisdom is that they're actually still higher, right? And then there were some bills in City Council this past year, the Know Your Rights bills, where you're supposed to get like a receipt if you had an interaction with a police officer. And some of the provisions passed that Richard Torres stayed true to, but some didn't. So there's that hasn't quite been fleshed out, right? Like, how do you actually do this? How do we hold police accountable to the great and awesome power they have, in which we're asking them to protect us, but also not to abuse their power and harm us, right? It's a difficult balancing act in a city this big, right? And here we are in Brooklyn, which is our largest, most populous borough. There's a lot going on all the time. So, I went too far. Sorry, I'm terrible at keeping, media on my side. Okay, so. This seems really easy, right? Conversation on the street. Police don't need a suspicion to talk to us, right? You can say hello. I'm from the Midwest, so I say hello to everyone still, even having lived here a decade, right? And my young daughter is waving at strangers now all the time. I'm like, that's my fault. She's never gonna be a real New Yorker. It's terrible. Not that New Yorkers aren't friendly, but you know what I mean. So police don't need a suspicion to talk to us. So Maurice, do we have an obligation to speak to police officers, respond to their hellos? We don't. Do we have to stay and speak to them? Do we have to stop what we're doing and speak? We don't, I assume you're saying no? All right. How do you guys feel about lying to officers?
Not supposed to.
Right. Not a good idea, right? Right? Okay. So that's something that we like to talk about too. Don't lie to get yourself out of a situation, because you might not even be in a situation, right? Like, don't mistake being spoken to by an officer for already being in trouble and like envisioning yourself in Brooklyn arraignments that night. But you should know, and this is true, and this is a tactic, an investigation tactic, officers can lie to us. Okay, I tell my clients this all the time. They can lie and say they have information they don't have. This is all about getting investigation and pursuing leads, right, under the guise of it. And so we have to be very conscious that while that's something that an officer can do, that's not something that we should ever do. Because if we're lying and we're caught in a lie, what does that give rise to? Suspicion, right? Okay. So what's the best thing, I'll ask you two young dapper gentlemen, what's the best thing to do when an officer approaches and starts asking questions? You could say, am I under arrest, right? Or what was that one?
Am I being detained?
Am I being detained? That sounds really dorky. Officer, am I being detained? How does that sit with you, Maurice? You feel like that's something you want to say?
Maybe we can word it a little better.
Yeah. All right. But the reason we teach am I being detained is because that's legally relevant language, okay? Am I under arrest is as well, but as you'll see, we go through the steps. That's kind of the end of the ladder, right? We're still on the first rung here, and the question really is, am I being detained? And one of the reasons we teach these legal buzzwords is because it's one of the triggers that lets an officer know, guess what, like, I've been to some seminars, I know what my rights are. Like, I'm not trying to give you attitude, I'm not trying to get out of something, but I'm trying to let you know, like, you're stopping me, you're asking me questions, like, I'm not represented right now, like, am I being detained, sir? Am I being detained, ma'am? And that can do two things, right? It can escalate the situation. Perhaps if Haishim asks it, it could alleviate it if I ask it, right? Or they could be like, you're a lawyer, right? And well, there's enough jokes for that for another day. But we teach that's how to say it. So we're gonna practice it together. We're gonna say, am I being detained? And you're gonna say it out loud, and it's gonna feel like kindergarten, but it's important to get these words in your mouth, okay? So on 3, we're gonna say, am I being detained? 1, 2, 3. Am I being detained? Oh, that sounded great. It sounded like you all have been to a Know Your Rights seminar, right? All right. So what do you do if the answer is no? Go ahead.
Okay, if you ask a question and if the officer ignore your question and keep on going, but not only that you're in hurry, you want to go somewhere, and they want to look at like you want to be run away or suspicious, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you gonna do?
You can keep walking. So here's the other thing too.
No, but they will not let you stop.
Well, if you ask them that, so here's what we teach. If you were just trying to go on your way, right, but an officer say we're walking, right, and these guys are officers, and I'm walking, and they start talking to me and maybe stop me like this, good morning, officer, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
All right, can I help you with something?
Yeah, so there was a robbery around the corner. I just wanted to know because I saw you walking from that way. Do you know anybody that was?
I don't, officer. Have a great day. I'm late to run some errands. All right, thank you. Have a great day. Right? So, like, you don't have to. You can give your common courtesy, but you don't have to stay in that situation, right? Mm-hmm.
It's good for you to do that. Not someone like me.
This is what we said before, right? I might get away with that, but if the roles are reversed, Haishim here, right? I'm the officer now, and I'm stepping in front, and I'm saying, hey, hi, how you doing today?
Am I being detained?
Well, I just saw you. No, I just have a quick question. You were actually coming out
I'm
that
actually
bodega,
late
right?
for work right now.
No, it's alright. I just had a quick question. I saw you with your friend down there coming out of that bodega. Your friend had that mask on,
I don't know
right?
who that is.
Okay, well, I'm pretty sure you must, because I saw you talking to him.
No, I
when you came out.
I'm sorry.
Are you trying to
No,
have
I mean, I'm just trying to.
I'm just asking you some questions.
Am I under? What's going on?
I'm asking you some questions about your friend that came out of that bodega.
I don't know who that was.
Alright, so listen, right? Like, that's a much more realistic situation of what can happen, especially for a young man of color versus white lady walking down the street.
Actually, it's not realistic.
Go ahead.
Because in reality, it would probably be a little bit more tension and probably eventually get a lot more hostile in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
You took probably maybe 30 seconds and it was very amicable. So while the talk is appreciated, the real life scenario would flare in
a second.
Exactly.
Yeah, and as long as it takes to get out, whatever, right?
What else would be different though?
And in my case,
Go ahead.
the officer said, I'm asking the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Period. You didn't answer.
Right.
I'm asking the question.
And that's a very realistic scenario of what will happen, right? The officer's not gonna answer your question. But what we teach, and this is what we said in the beginning, like, it's important that we know what our rights are and what the officer should be doing in that situation, but it doesn't mean that we should, like, that Haishim should keep saying, detain, am I being detained, right? Like, his best tack might just be to, like, stop and let me ask my questions, right? So we always have to decide who we are, who we're perceived as being, and what's gonna be right in that situation. But what you need to know from this slide, and I'll get to your question in 1 second, is that the am I being detained is the legally relevant language, all right? And if you get that out once, and then maybe they say yes, right? Well, then you're stuck with that answer too, but at least you've gotten that out and you've started to assert that you actually know the situation that's going on, and you know that if they say yes, you're being detained, they have to have a reasonable suspicion to hold you there. Okay, and why that's so important is I think also as it's happening, it can help calm the person down who can be in a very much more precarious situation in a conversation with an officer than I might be, right? But it also will give you some demarcations to be able to tell your attorney, should this turn into an arrest? Here's what happened when this happened. And then it gives me some ammunition in the hearing to talk about the legality of a stop and maybe a search that happens. There was the young lady in the back, and then I'll go to our gentleman in the middle.
So in the interaction we were doing, where he's really trying to get to work with someone that you're fired, would it ever be a good idea to say, hey, you might have questions, but I'm really busy right now. Here's my contact information. If you can contact me later about it. Because
Right.
if you have to go and you're having this back and forth, then
Right.
you might be late. You might get fired or whatever. Is that
Right.
a good idea or not?
Listen, I would never give my contact information to an officer.
They would find you anyways, right?
Right? I totally see where you're coming from, and I think the inclination is always to try to have human interaction with people, right? But the issue is that we're not in the same power situation. And, like, you're not carrying a gun on your holster. Like, you don't have a badge, and you're not in a uniform. So that's why we want you to know this. Like, the question is, am I being detained? And if the answer is no, then walk away, right? Or try and walk away before that even happens, before they start answering the question. The reality is, I can probably walk away, but my two colleagues here probably can't walk away at the same ease, right? So the question is, am I being detained? And that signals to the officer that you know what's up, that that's a legally relevant word, and they best have some kind of suspicion that they can articulate to keep you there.
Why wouldn't you give them your information?
Why what?
Why wouldn't you give the officer your information? If it's going to make it quicker, I mean, he's an officer.
Why does the officer need your information, or why does he have a right to have your
This way he
information?
can let me go my way, and he knows that he can find me anytime, and I have nothing to hide.
Okay, can I ask a question of the room again? Can innocent people be arrested? Yes. Okay. So, and can officers lie to you? Yes. I'm not saying that with judgment, with any kind of, if we talk one-on-one, like I have a lot of experiences that inform my opinion, but the truth is that officers can lie and can use your contact information to find out whatever they can. I mean, here's a non-New York City example, but you guys hear about how the 23andMe, all these DNA tests, they just found someone and charged him with homicide, right? From a like online test of, is my family from Ireland or is my family from, France? I mean, so I'm just saying, like, any information that you give up, you are opening yourself up to further interactions. And half the time, what we're talking about, conversation on the street, because there's a suspicion that is not needed at that point, just for conversation, you're also not required to give any information. So you never should give your contact information to an officer unless there's a warrant happening, right? And unless you've been arrested and you're getting pedigree, we'll go through that. But our advice as attorneys, and your right, is that you do not have to give that information. And if you can't get out of the conversation by asking if you're being detained, that now you're detained, right? That means they're detaining you, which means they now have to have an articulable suspicion in order to keep you there, all right? And this is when the legal stuff comes in. So our advice is, am I being detained? We'll get you out of that conversation as quickly as possible. If they don't have a suspicion that you've actually been with your friend in the bodega that just got robbed, legally they can't keep you there. Might they still keep you there? Yes, right? But at least now we're in suppression grounds and we're in like the illegality of the stop in the first place. Does that make sense? Again, we can't give a cookie cutter like how to get out of these conversations to everyone, right? But that's the first step.
I believe that police officers, depending on the years they are trained with the department, when they encounter a civilian in the public street, they're conditioned to look at certain factors. One is age. They treat you based on your age.
Mm-hmm.
Two is your demeanor,
Mm-hmm.
your appearance,
Mm-hmm.
how you dress,
Mm-hmm.
and also your response, which indicates to them your level of education.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they really then take it a step further.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the factors that I really like.
And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about formal education. We're talking about simple rights that we all know and can employ to signal to the officer, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just being very upfront with the fact that I know that if I'm not detained, I don't have to keep talking to you, right? And I mean, again, that's the like easy way, like that happens.
Right there,
De-escalates.
right there, what you just said,
Mhm.
that is what I call a diffusing statement, and that's what I was gonna tell you that you're probably missing. That diffusing statement should be a tone to calm people down. If anybody from the street came up and asked me a question, I will answer it. If you came after me and asked me a question very aggressively, I'm gonna respond very aggressively.
Mhm.
But that right there is, your statement is correct. The diffusing statement, I think, when other people are addressing, I wanna get away, come up with diffusing statements like that and see you later, but.
I'm not being disrespectful. I'm in a hurry. I'm wondering if I'm being detained, right? And this is why we also say, like, if you respond like, this is on live streaming, but with expletives and like be like, you mother effing pig, right? Like, what the heck? Why are you stopping me? I have places to go. Like, come on, that's not going to help matters, right? And with our different lived experiences, that might very much be how you're feeling, right? But this is about like trying to get out of a situation with the least amount of harm to yourself, okay? And that's what we want to keep talking about. Yes, Judge?
Yeah, I just want to say, whenever I have an interaction with a policeman, I always call them officer.
Right. We suggest that too.
I always call them officer.
Mhm.
I want to let them know that I recognize who they are, and what their authority is, and they're in a position of power.
And that's your first diffusing statement, even by saying officer, right? And sir and ma'am. And like we can have a whole other talk about like authority and how it gets assigned and who's like being made to bow down to it. But the situation is if you're getting stopped and asked questions and you're not feeling safe in that moment, like diffuse it, get out. Ask if you're being detained.
Yeah, a few years back, I got stopped, I guess, many years back actually. I had a blue Camaro, I guess some guy had a very similar looking car. I got stopped twice, back to back, different officers. And, you know, I think the first time I turned my car off and the guy said, listen, I almost knew that you weren't guilty because you turned your car off. And the second day when I got stopped, I kept the car on, I lowered the window, and I said, yeah, a couple of you guys stopped me yesterday, I totally understand you doing your job. Oh, you got stopped yesterday? Okay, go ahead, sir, go on.
Right, and that could have gone 1,000 different ways, right? And it depends where that officer just came from too. So that's our big lesson in this. In this very first step, anybody, like the officers can always talk to you on the street. Your goal is to keep going on with your day, make your appointments, not give your information to them, okay? Go ahead, oh yeah, you had a question, I'm sorry.
Okay, if they say yes, you are being detained, and you have an attorney, can you say, well, I'd like to call my attorney?
I love that. That's our next slide. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, absolutely. If you have an attorney, we're going to talk about remaining silent. So there's a few more buzz phrases that we go through. Right. So let's do a quick role play. I'm trying to keep us on track. Do we have a volunteer to practice what Hashim and I just did, but someone to be the passerby, and you want to be the officer this time?
Yeah, sure.
All right, Morris can be the officer the next role play. Can anyone volunteer to come up and practice? What's the phrase that we just learned? Am I being detained?
Anyone? Not all at once.
Oh, hey, I know you took a front
Front row, gotta do it.
Thank you. What's your name? Charette. Hi. Thank you so much for volunteering. All right, so you're just going on your business. So maybe, we're talking here, and I'm going to say, all right, Charette, it was good to see you. I'll see you later.
Hey, ma'am, where you headed? Where you coming from? I just saw you come from over there, and you just hugged that white woman. I'm actually, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. There's a robbery in the neighborhood. Do you live around here?
Am I being detained, sir?
Yes, because I saw you come from the store that was robbed around the same time that the robbery took place.
Okay, well, I'd like to call my attorney.
Okay, could you give me 1 second? I'm just gonna call for backup.
All right, good job. We decided to work out some stuff, yeah. And he's like, we're gonna move this along. We all have dinner to get to. All right. So what did we hear loud and clear? Am I being detained, right? So normally we'll let you off easy, but you knew too much, so he knew that. So we said yes, all right? So, but it's as easy as that, right? And it's not as easy as that. It's not as easy as that, right? So, but if you at least, even if you can feel it escalating, use officer, use please, use thank you. I also say, I'll get to your question 1 second. Another good rule that we teach is the 5-finger rule. Try not to say anything that is going to be more than 5 words, right? So especially if you're in a stressful situation, you kind of have your hands at your side where the officers can see them, right? And you might want to just think to yourself, I'm not going to give any more information than 5. Usually yes or no is the best response. Yes sir, no ma'am, right? But try to keep yourself from over-explaining things or from linking something up that you wouldn't even be thinking, right? Because you're going on your day, but you don't know what kind of information is trying to be sought. So the 5-finger rule is kind of one of those, keep yourself calm, try to keep things under 5 words. You had a question over there?
Yeah, it occurred to me that if a police officer is in plain clothes, not a uniform, that could be a really big surprise and very confusing. And can you just imagine a scenario? I mean, it might take somebody longer to process
what's happening. And it happens all the time. So many of our clients, at least, are arrested by plainclothes officers. Plainclothes officers still are supposed to have their badges visible, especially if they're stopping. So they wear them on a chain, usually under the clothes. So you could also, if someone's asking you questions that seem like they're interrogating you, like just happened up here, I would ask that. I'm sorry, sir, are you an officer? Are you with NYPD? Just to ask that, and again, do it from that moment of trying to diffuse. Thank you for saying that word. That's a word we usually use throughout this, but thank you for bringing it up. But diffusing the situation. Normally, most of the stops and requests for information will happen from officers wearing the blue and whites. But detectives are often in suits, right? So, but badges are still supposed to be visible, and this was part of this lawsuit too. Is we're supposed to know when our police force, right, who's funded by our tax dollars and who's there to serve and protect our communities, we're supposed to know when we're having those interactions with them. So yeah, that's a very good point. this is kind of from the guys that you're going to know that it's a police officer the minute you see them. But we just went to detention, all right? This is kind of where the meat of all this is. So when can an officer stop you? So it's up here. Police need reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion, Maurice, right? So what is that? It's kind of up on the board, but does anyone have an idea of what reasonable suspicion is? Is it probable cause? No. Is it something less? It's something less than probable cause, right? Okay, and we're talking about detention, meaning like, no, you're not free to leave. I'm going to keep asking you questions and perhaps frisk you, right? We're not talking about arrest yet. So this is more than a hunch, right? It can't be like, I think you might have done something wrong, right? If I, as Maurice's attorney, then at the hearing, you're like, why did you detain my client on the street? It can't be, he looked suspicious, right? Like, that's not enough. It has to be like, well, we were looking for some graffiti artist. He had some like red paint on his hands and the graffiti wasn't red. All right, that's a reasonable suspicion, right? That's more than a hunch. That's something that was able to be put into words. So that's where we are with detention, okay? It's a reasonable suspicion. We're still not arrested yet. Maybe we fit, this is the most, has anyone heard this fit the description? This is what stop and frisk was all about. Every time these young men of color, still today, but especially at the height of it, the reason so many people were stopped so many times, the heart of the case, of the civil case that was brought, was about fit the description, right? Like, that's why Haishim and Maurice get stopped, but I don't, right? Because it's always about fitting the description, and a very bland description, usually of just a young man of color. Drop a suspicious object upon seeing police, and this is a classic we learn in law school. If it's a designated high crime area and you run away from the police, you don't have that, am I being detained? You just are like, I'm faster than you. You know? I'm gonna make sure I'm not detained. They can give chase, right? And that's where then you're gonna end up finding yourself arrested. And that's about interaction, knowing your surroundings, knowing how you're perceived in your surroundings. Okay?
A quick question.
Yeah.
That scenario.
Running from the
Question
police?
was, am I being detained?
Mm-hmm.
The answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
How long can a person be detained?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, how long can a person be detained for?
24 hours?
Well, no, if you're taken from the place you are, then you're now in custody. So we're talking detention, we're talking about on the street. We're talking about they're questioning you on the street. If they're removing you from a place, you're now under arrest. Right, but how long can a police officer stand there and ask you questions? It could be a long time. I don't have an answer. There's not as far as I know, there's not like an actual like limit on the framework. I mean, I think it's all based on reasonableness, right? Like, how long could you keep someone without probable cause to arrest them? I think in the legal world, if you are asking someone questions and you're blocking their path and you're saying they're not free to leave, as your attorney, I'm going to say you were under arrest. You might not have had cuffs on. They might not have said you were under arrest, but you're under arrest at that point. And you hadn't, maybe you'd invoked your right to remain silent, or maybe the searches weren't wrong, right? So it's not about like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's really about what detention looks like. And a good lawyer is always going to say, like, if you're no longer free to leave after a certain amount of time, then you're also technically under arrest, even though you haven't been told that. I know that's a lawyer answer, but that's the answer. It's really about the totality of the circumstances. So once the answer might be yes, once they get that surprising question that has legalese in it, and the answer is yes, now we're about invoking our rights, like kind of proactive invoking our rights, okay? It says it up on the board, but if you're being detained, do you have to speak to the police? No. Do you have to give them your name and number and address? No. Have to. Not should you, would it help the situation, right? But do you have to? The answer is no. Again, I said the 5-finger rule. Here I would say, like, this is where if you have to answer something because it's going to diffuse the situation, keep it short. But these are yes and no answers. And really the only response that you should be saying, I think this flies in here. Oh yeah. I'm going to remain silent. All right? So let's practice that. Yeah? By not remaining silent, by saying it. Because you have to say it, okay? So I'm going to ask you some questions, but your response is, I'm going to remain silent. Feels kind of weird, right? To say it out loud. We see it on TV. It feels kind of weird. That's what we want you to not feel weird about it, right? Because this is probably the most important thing you can say during any interaction, even more than I've got an attorney. It's I'm going to remain silent. Quick thing, once you say that, it's like the magic wand we say. Once you invoke your right to remain silent, questioning is supposed to stop. Does it stop? No, right? So what do you do? If you're being detained and you've invoked your right to remain silent, and they're still asking you questions, what do you do? Keep saying it, or just remain silent, right? It's important to note that under case law, right, if you do, like, asked to go to the bathroom or asked for a phone call, you need to re-invoke your right to remain silent, okay? So it's like you have to keep saying it, and silence itself is not invoking that right. You gotta say, I am going to remain silent.
The comedian Ron White once said, I knew I had the right to remain silent, I just didn't have the ability.
That's totally true. That's great. I knew I had the right, but not the ability.
I was gonna ask, because I was gonna ask earlier about that, but from a black male perspective, how safe is that? To choose to remain silent?
Sure. Right, not to ask you to speak on behalf of all black men, right? But right, how safe is that? This is what we're saying. Like, I know. Do you guys wanna? I don't wanna.
Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, you know, sometimes answering a small question like, no, I wasn't in that bodega, I just came from the train. That'll get me home.
Yeah. Or.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, at the same time, you know, I think I can't speak for everyone. I just know, like, I've been asked, like, hey, are you Gerald? I'm like, no, are you Gerald? But that's my response, because I'm like, you know, I know where I'm going, I have things to do, and I'm always dressed in a suit because I'm going to work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're asking me these questions because of the neighborhood I live in. But you're right. Sometimes it's not the safest thing to do to say, I'm going to remain silent. Or just to upfront say, am I being detained? Because, you know, 9 times out of 10, they're not by themselves. They're with other police officers. And, you know, situations can go left or right. So that's just my experience, though.
And that's why we're trying to really emphasize over and over, there's no cookie cutter response, because there's really no cookie cutter interaction, right? And what's right for me might get me out of the situation, might not get Haishim out of the situation, right? And all we can impress upon people in our community is that you gotta do what keeps you the safest, what gets you out of the situation with the least harm, right? And if you just keep saying, sir, you know, not shouting like, I'm gonna remain silent, right? But like, sir, ma'am, I'm gonna remain silent, or I'll talk to a lawyer, right? And just kind of over and over saying that. I mean, there's a lot of like, when do we bow to the authority, even when we know in our heart of hearts we haven't done anything wrong, right? But what keeps us safe? And so our whole goal is always about safety and getting you home, right? Making that train. And that looks really different for people, depending where we come from and what neighborhoods we're in too, right? Mm-hmm.
And again, this is a know your rights. These are your rights. This does not mean that they're telling you to do this in every situation. The Brooklyn Defender Service is here presenting tonight, telling you what your rights are, and then you assess the situation, but at least then you know you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. They're advising you 5 words. They're advising you what to do, but you have to assess the situation.
We're still on the street. We're still not, I forgot I learned how to do these things. I made things flip into the, hey, all right. All right, so we're still on the street, right? You maybe invoked your right to remain silent, but once, here we come to the frisk part of the stop, all right? Once you're stopped, an officer can frisk you. Is a frisk the same as a search? Does anyone know? No.
No, it's not.
Okay, that's correct, Maurice. Do you know what the differences are?
Yes, I do. A frisk is more of like a pat down, and a search is going in your belongings, going inside your pockets, I guess searching your jacket and things like that, and bags again.
Right. So that's a really important distinction, and I think that gets blurred all the time. I know it gets blurred by a lot of the officers I have in my cases.
Is it safe to say that your hands stay outside on the
Yes,
frisk?
right. And does anybody know what I think I have it up here, but what the point of a frisk is from the officer's perspective? Safety, right? Because sure, someone could have a knife or a gun or something that they could get real fast, right? So once they have found they have a reasonable suspicion, something more than a hunch to stop you, they then get the right to frisk you, right? This is why these number of the chart we had up there, like how many people are innocent, right? Because the stop and frisk, sorry to digress, but this is important. The reason that stop and frisk became a police tactic, because the idea was we'll get all the guns off the streets just by stopping people who we don't have probable cause to stop, and then we search them, and then there's a gun, right? That actually found out that isn't what was happening. It wasn't actually we weren't finding guns for stop and frisk, but the whole point, the legally relevant ability of the officers to do that is about their own safety. Go ahead.
What in the case of a woman when it comes to the frisk question?
Women officers are supposed to frisk women, yeah. And male officers are supposed to frisk men. Does that happen often? I don't think so. I think it's mostly men that are getting frisked though. Right, but that's a good point, especially, and if we're talking searches, it's definitely gendered in that way. We'll talk about people that maybe identify as trans or people that are gender nonconforming, and there's what kinds of risks they are presented with as they go through the system too. But yeah, that's a good question. All right, so what happens, Maurice, if during this frisk, this pat down for my safety as an officer, I decide to go in your pocket?
Continue reaffirming my rights by saying I do not consent to the search.
That was timed perfectly with my little click. We're gonna take the show on the road, folks. Right, I do not consent to this search. So, why is that so important to say? That's another legally weird, right? Or I'm like, am I being detained is our first one, then we ask you to say I'm going to remain silent. So let's say it out loud so we get comfortable. I do not consent to this search. I do not consent to this search. All right? Why do I love that as your defense attorney? Yeah, I'm literally saying, I have not given consent. You cannot argue that I said, oh, go ahead, take a look at my pockets. Oh, let me open up my book bag for you. Oh, I got a purse here too, you know? Like, I do not consent to this search. And this is a situation of escalation versus diffusing too, right? Like, if I feel safe and like I'm not going to be harmed by making sure other people hear this, I might yell it, right? Me, white Amanda, might be walking down the street and you start to search me and I might feel safe enough to say, I'm not gonna say, officer, please, sir, no, sir, right? Like, I'm gonna say, I do not consent to this search. I'm gonna make sure Danielle hears it. I'm gonna make sure people hear it all the way in the back, right? A choice I might be able to make based on how I'm perceived and how I identify. But this is really important. Okay, so you've invoked your right to remain silent, and then you've said, I do not consent to the search. What should you do, just for bonus points, after you say, I do not consent to the search?
Let it go on.
What was that?
Let it go on.
What? Stay silent. Reinvoke your right to stay silent, right? Be like, and also I am remaining silent from here on out, okay? I mean, this sounds really clunky, but it's really important. And this is how, as a defense attorney, if you end up being arrested, this is how we can help you. And this is also how you don't get yourself into some situation where you've said something that gives a probable cause to arrest you, right? So I think we have one more. So now we're going to do this next level of role play where we've learned to ask, am I being detained? All right. We've learned to invoke our right to remain silent. And then we've also learned before the frisk and the pat down happened, we've learned to say, I do not consent to this search. Our recommendation is you say it before the frisk. Like we understand that they're legally allowed to do the pat down over the clothes, but in our mind, that's still a search. So you're going to want to say that you don't consent to the search before the pat down happens. Okay. And then maybe again, if folks start going in your pockets. So do we have a volunteer? Do we have a brave volunteer? Maybe someone from the back, someone from the middle, someone from the strongly disagree, strongly agree to do this? No? Thank you. All right. So you've got Officer Crawford here. He's going to help you out this time.
She's just gonna walk in
Oh
on her
yeah,
own?
so I'm the sketchy friend that everyone has.
Pardon me, where you come from?
I'm just walking down the street.
Who were you with just now?
A lovely friend of mine, her name is Michelle.
Okay, what were you guys doing? I saw you guys doing something that you weren't supposed to be doing.
What was that, officer? Are you an officer, actually?
Yes, I am. You see my beautiful badge here?
It is a beautiful badge.
Thank you. Shining. So what you got there? What's in your bag?
It's a traditional New York women handbag material.
Can you take out what's inside of it for me?
Am I being searched, sir?
Maybe.
Could you be a little more specific, sir?
Are you gonna take out what's in your bag so I can see what's in your bag?
I do not consent to being searched, officer.
Okay, free to go.
Thank you so much. All right, so that was great. What was something that you felt that you did well with what we talked about, and what you could have maybe improved on?
I could have been a little bit more prompt with my do not consent to being searched rather than being pleasant.
Right, and asking the question, something maybe we can do. Go ahead.
She could have stood silent, however, she was courteous, courtesy goes a long way.
And that got her out of the situation, right? And again, even her sketchy friend, like two white women, right? We're remembering where we come from and how we're perceived. And also, you asked the question, am I being searched? She was like, well, yeah, I think you might be, but I'm not going to say it, right? So we say, don't ask the question unless that will get you out of the situation. Like, invoke your right. Be like, I'm not going to consent to this. You don't have to say, I refuse to consent. You can say, I'm not consenting to a search right now, officer. Also, don't forget what we went through in step 1, right? Am I being detained? You asked if he was an officer, but ask if you're being detained, right? The whole thing about understanding our rights is understanding the steps, right? And the kind of escalation that leads to arrest. So before we even say, I'm gonna be silent or I'm not gonna consent to a search, we can say, officer, are you detaining me? Like, is there a reason you're detaining me, right? And that's kind of what we wanna learn. And then say we're gonna stay silent when they ask questions. You don't have to tell them what kind of fabric the handbag is. And then don't, but it's amazing, right? This is a safe space role play, and it's still like, you find yourself being like, this bag is from my grandma stole it. Oh my God, Go ahead in the back.
I don't know how many have cameras these days, probably not most of them. If there's no camera, there's no evidence that anybody has said anything.
So something I'll say as an attorney, right? Evidence is testimony, right? So I could call you as my client. I know we don't often do this at suppression hearings, and I could have you testify to the fact that you didn't consent to the search. I could ask the onlooker who's driving past, right, who maybe saw it happen, if we can track that person down. Did you hear my client say that they didn't consent to a search? Did you hear this? Did you hear them invoke the right to remain silent? So absolutely, 100%. Body cams are becoming more prevalent. I have issues with those as a defense attorney myself. The defense bar is very divided on that. You're right. But in the moment, these rights also help you stay centered, help you stay calm, help you remember what level you're in, right? So you're not all of a sudden going up to like, give me a lawyer, right? Because maybe the officer is just asking you or being like, you dropped something, and I was just trying to alert you to that, ma'am, or what a cute baby you have. You know what I mean? Like, it could be something much more innocuous. So if you can remember these rights, if you can get through them, even if there's no evidence of you ever having invoked them, you know your evidence is also testimony, right? And the judge is there to decide whose testimony is the most credible, right? So you're protecting yourself, you're keeping yourself centered in your rights, and you're invoking the rights that we have. Police don't have a right to search us. We have a right to not consent to the search. They're our rights, right? They're our rights. Police have authority to do certain things, but these are our rights that we're talking about. All right, so thank you very much, and thank you for allowing us. That's always a more tough example. Arrest, okay? So Officer Crawford here said, go on your way. I see you've used some legal buzzwords. I'm gonna respect that in this moment. But what happens if the answer was no? All right, we're gonna go to arrest. We're not gonna do a role play on this because the role play would just be turning you around and putting cuffs on you, right? We don't have those. Once they have probable cause to arrest you, then they can go in your pockets, okay? So probable cause is like, not only did graffiti just get sprayed on the bodega wall, but I'm like holding the can and it's like dripping on me, right? That's probable cause. That's more than even reasonable suspicion. Or someone points you out. There was a robbery that happens, and perhaps the person who was robbed is actually sitting in the police car behind you, and they said, she did it, Amanda did it, like, I recognize that face. They're gonna arrest you, okay? And that's legal. Once they do that, then they can, the search can actually be brought in. So we won't get into the specifics of that. There are still warrants that are required, but there are things called searches incident to a lawful arrest, right? So again, you want to say that I don't consent to this search. And this is going in your bags, maybe it's a car stop, this is going in the trunk of your car. You want to make sure that you've again invoked that, the right to not consent to the search, and then again to remain silent, okay? Something in New York, this is New York specific, of course. Oh, first I should say, you actually don't have a right to be informed of what you're being arrested for, okay? There's kind of two reasons for that, and this is something my clients say to me all the time, like, you're the first person to tell me what I'm charged with, and that's actually how it works when you come through arraignments. It's your defense attorney. One, because the police don't charge you with a crime. They will cite a crime that they've arrested you for. It's often much higher than what the district attorney's office then actually looks at the facts, talks to the officer or the witness, and then decides what to charge you with. So they don't have to tell you what they're charging you with because they're not the ones charging you, right? Why is this important? Because it's also like, once you've been arrested, do you think you're gonna talk your way out of that arrest? No. Like, is anything you say gonna get you out of that situation? Even if you're 100% innocent.
It can and will be used against you.
It can and will be used against you, right? Which is why we say, like, you keep your 5-finger rule going, you keep your yes, no's first, and you don't give any more information than you need to. And you don't have to give them any information. In fact, you don't have to tell them your name, you don't have to give them your driver's license. Now, do we recommend that in helping you out? You don't have to submit to the fingerprints, right? Do we think that's a good idea? What do you think, guys?
If you're already there, yes. It might still avoid a riot.
Right. But it will delay you getting through the system, right? So in New York, you're not required to carry an ID with you when you're walking around. You're not. But if you don't have an ID, it's gonna make the process much longer, because arrest doesn't always mean coming through arraignments and meeting me. Arrest can also mean a summons ticket or a DAT, which we're gonna talk about briefly as well. So again, this is where we're gonna talk about, like, what does diffuse the situation, maybe help us get police through faster, help us get to central booking faster, right? But also protect your own rights. So often, I think probably the most common thing that my clients say is, like, they said if I just told them this, then they let me go. Why am I still here, right? So that's the classic. Like, again, the officers are allowed to investigate what's going on and try and figure out what's happened by lying to you, by telling you mistruths, and that's part of the investigation. So once you're under arrest, you're not going to get out of it. And you want to be really careful too, and you want to keep saying, I'm choosing to remain silent. That's just so important. So we don't get statement notice. Go ahead.
I just want to, you say that in New York City or New York State are required?
New York City. I'm sorry, I said New York State, didn't I? In New York City, I think I just said New York. Here in the city, we don't have to have ID on us. If you're driving, you need to have an ID, or else you'll get charged for driving without a license. But when you're walking around, you don't have to have an ID. Oh yeah, like remember your driver's license number?
You could also remember everyone has a driver's ID number. You could also remember that number if you don't want to carry ID.
I'm going backwards. So the reason why that's important, we're not gonna, sorry, I forgot which way this went. We'll talk about in a second because it's the kinds of arrests you can be subject to, but here is our summary, right? So you want to invoke and re-invoke your right to remain silent. So let's say I'm going to remain silent one more time, all together, a beautiful chorus. I'm going to remain silent, all right? And then you might want to say, I want to see a lawyer, or I have a lawyer, right? And then you might want to add, but I'm still going to remain silent, right? So you want to keep saying that. And here's what we just talked about. The only time you have to say anything is when you give your name and address during booking and after arrest. I don't know why I wrote have to, because you don't have to say anything then. You do not have to give this information. I would recommend you would, unless there's some other circumstance why you wouldn't give your government name. Right, it helps to make contacts. It might get you out before arraignments, and it's really just going to slow the process down. If you keep refusing to give name, it's called pedigree information, right, in cop parlance. It's just going to slow everything down. It's going to make it harder to get you out fast. If you're being searched legally or illegally, even if you're like, I think they might have probable cause to search me right now. This seems like a pretty legitimate search. Don't consent, all right? Don't consent to the search. Talking ourselves out of arrest, highly unlikely. Okay, and again, remember, anytime we lie or fudge or give more information, it could lead to probable cause to arrest us. So we don't want to do that.
Can you just go over what they're allowed to search? You mentioned the car, the trunk, your pockets. What are they?
Oh, yeah, so I mean, we're talking about on the street, right? So when you're in the detention but you haven't been arrested yet, they're not supposed to go in your pockets. However, when they're frisking you on the outside and they feel something in your pocket, my clicker, right? And they're frisking me and they feel this could be a knife, right? And a court would probably agree with the fact that they're then allowed to go in my pocket based on the plain feel, right? And like, why would I be carrying a clicker around on the street? No, this could be a knife. So they're allowed to go in, right, and take it, and that will probably be held up in court, right? But when I see that happening, I'm still gonna say, hey, I don't consent to that search.
But after you went one more step,
So now you've been arrested?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What are they allowed to search?
So it's locked. So let me get back to my law school days and jurisprudence days. Locked trunks, locked glove compartments. Those are still supposed to get warrants, or they can be inventory searched if like a car gets taken down to the precinct. Same thing with bags. Like it's supposed to be anything that's in the grabbable area. So like if I'm under arrest and I'm sitting in a chair, like I'm sitting on the curb by myself, like you're not supposed to be going through my car. Right, that's gonna be the subject of a suppression hearing. But if going through your pockets, I think the scenario that makes the most sense in this on the street is that they would go in your pockets because they feel something that I could still get. It's still about officer safety then, right? Or if they saw me like, drop a gun into a bag and then drop my bag on the sidewalk before they come up to me, right? Then they probably are allowed to search that. Or like this is the like flushing stuff down the toilet, like I'm like running away and trying to get rid of drugs, right? They can go see what's in that bag that I just threw away too. But these are all, again, this is where like we're not giving specific legal advice because I have to make sure my research is up to date and then see why I'd be trying to suppress it. But when we're talking about just searching you, the difference between over your clothes and in your pockets, based on the plain feel, they can then go in your pocket if they think it's something that might be unsafe for them.
Also, on
Yes.
the legal advice, this is a general
Yes.
informational know your rights. There is no attorney-client privilege that attaches here, and there is no formal legal advice given. If you're ever in a situation, then get an attorney, Brooklyn Defender Services, legal aid, private defenders, there's different ways, but there is no legal affiliation here, a lawyer-client privilege, lawyer-client relationship that is established.
Thank you, Fern. So I'm just doing a time check at 7:12, but we're almost to the end. One of the other things on that slide has to deal with something we see often kind of in video encounters of police interactions is stopping an arrest. or trying to intervene in an arrest, right? So our general advice is if someone's getting arrested, you're not going to stop it, and it's not going to be a safe situation for you to try to stop the arrest, right? Again, I'm saying that broadly. There could be something specific that you think might make it safe. But I think cameras are really what has changed also since 2011, since the height of stop and frisk, because we all have video capability. Almost all of us walk around with smartphones, right? And so we can actually video interactions. And so we put together this little kind of using your camera and like what you're allowed to do. I would say this is one of these situations where if you pull out a camera and you're not involved in whatever's happening, the interaction with officers and the person in the street, you pull out a camera, you may quickly become involved, right? That is something, and it's like arrest now, ask questions, sort it out later. I have a lot of people who are arrested for obstructing governmental authority, right? The charges eventually get dropped, but not after they spend about 36 hours coming through the system. So this is also like, there are cop watching groups. There are groups that go around with the intent to, I've been part of those before in the past, where we go around and we video, we go to areas where there are a lot of police out who seem to be violating the rights of community members, and we videotape it. You're allowed to do that, okay? You can photograph and videotape the New York City Police Department. They might ask you to stop if they say that you're interfering with a legitimate activity, and that's how you might get arrested. If you see someone getting arrested and you start filming it, and you try to get a better shot, right? Like, then you'll end up arrested yourself. But, you know, should you be arrested, they can voucher your phone or you know, the phone camera as evidence. There was something, I went to a CLE last week, and they had this great advice, which is you can download a screenshot, like the screen, like instead of my gorgeous daughter, I might put on my phone, like, I do not consent to this search. And there's like, if you just Google it, like, I do not consent to this search, and it's your home screen, right? And so, and it's like, it's funny, but it's also, as far as we know, it's legally, like, blocking them from searching your phones, because this is like the ever-evolving jurisprudence about like what constitutes a search. Like, what if you don't have a lock screen on? Does that mean the cops can go through your contacts? So it's something to keep in mind. And it really is, it's like someone had this brilliant idea as this lawyer, and I was like, I never thought of that. Like, I deal with this all the time. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like, yeah, we all know what your kids look like, but I do not consent.
I have to play devil's advocate on this one, but why would you have something like that on your phone unless you've got something to hide?
Rights are only for the innocent people. Is that what you're saying, sir?
You're setting yourself up, that's what I think.
Well, again, I mean, this goes back to the, are we diffusing, are we trying to get out of the situation or not? So,
I get your point,
right.
Get your point.
Are you going to ask me how I can represent guilty people too? No, right, but here's the thing, like, the great part about our criminal legal system are there are certain great parts about it, right? One is like the presumption of innocence, right? One is that the government has to prove that I'm guilty. Like, I don't have to do anything. I can sit silent at trial, so can my attorney, right? I could have the easiest job in the world by never opening, by never crossing. I love that about it, right? So in my view, like, because I know innocent people can be arrested all the time, and because I don't actually care if you're innocent or if you're incredibly guilty, you still get the same rights because this is America and this is the democracy and this is the promise which was founded, which has not actually been realized, right? Because look at who's serving time in prisons. Look at who my clients are every day. There is racism that this entire legal system was founded on, and I'm not going to go off too much, but because of that, like, yeah, I haven't been arrested, I haven't been accused of a crime, but I kind of like the fact, like, I'm not going to consent to the search of my phone either, because I don't want you to search my brother's phone, my sister's phone, the community member next to me. So that's kind of my answer, broadly. Go ahead.
So let's say they violate rights, they stop you legally, they frisk you, and they don't detain you. What recourse do you have then?
So you can actually call, so this is like, do we get a receipt or not that we've been stopped and frisked? The answer is no, not yet. You can always call 311 and to get to the Civilian Complaint and Review Board. 311's, you know, our general info, and you can also report it to IAB. If you ask the officer for their name and badge number, if you can't see it, they are supposed to give it to you, okay? Will you always get it? Maybe not, but you're supposed to get it. It's also supposed to be visible, right? There's supposed to be the name and the badge number. If you look closely, you can see the precinct they're from too. But that's information that we have a right to know as a public, and you can ask for it. Mm-hmm.
But when you ask them and they refuse to give it to you and they walk away, how are you going to stop them?
So, well, don't stop them, right? Because that could, come here, you're being detained, officer. You might not be detained.
Yes, so I'm not sure you're detained.
Right, that's when we'll have real egalitarianism. Actually, because officers have to report in as to where they are and they have assignments every day, if you just take note of what the officer looked like, I'm not joking if you say like about 6 feet tall, like maybe had a beard, you know, close hair, the race, whatever you can remember, and you report that, the Civilian Complaint Review Board will look into it, as will the Internal Affairs Bureau, which is an NYPD. They will. This is how, right, like half the time people are abused by the cops and you go to sue them because they hurt you and you don't know their names. So all the suits start out as John Doe, but there's enough identifying information you can at least usually get it down to what precinct and who it might have been. So it might feel hopeless, and I think that's something that advocates for police reform, that was a conspiracy, are working for, to change that, to make it so it's much easier to have civilian accountability.
I'd like to add something to that. Time, day, and location will also help that out. Also, and if you already have your camera out and you see them getting into a car, whether it be marked or unmarked, it would be good to get that license plate, or if it's like a marked white NYPD car, they have markings on it, so they know who's driving that car, that time, that day, who's on tour, whatever. So that will help with your complaint.
I think a lot of people don't know if you're falsely arrested or falsely detained, you can actually bring a case against the police. A lot of people don't know this. No one ever informs them of this. Of course, the police aren't going to tell them. But if that ever happens, seek out attorney.
Right, and again, it's about, police officers do have to really know where they are at certain times, and it's not an exact science, but it is something that can help you get there and can bring some accountability. It's something we're working on as a city. There's not a lot of actual oversight from the civilian side of the police force, and not a lot of will and political parts too, but it's something that a lot of community groups have really been fighting for a long time. All right, so a few more tips. Subway stations, this is something we as New Yorkers know. Has everyone seen the searches in the subway stations, a table, and there's a couple friendly officers? If you're coming off the train and they ask to stop you, they can. It's a public safety exception, right? Like they're looking for bombs, et cetera, et cetera. There's not really much you can do. You can, although what can you say if they're searching you? I do not consent to this search, right? Like invoke it anyway. And even if you don't have anything to hide, I say invoke it anyway, right? That's really awkward, right? But that's part of it, getting over the awkwardness of it to invoke our rights. But if you're entering the subway station, like even if you've gone through the turnstile, but you haven't actually gone onto the train yet, you can leave the subway station. That's kind of you're not consenting to the search, right? So like if you're not coming out from the trains, if you're coming out from the trains, you've already used it, so they can search you, but you can leave a subway station if you don't want an officer to search your bag.
So I'm going downstairs, say, wherever, Times Square, and they say, excuse me, sir, I'd like to search your bag, I can say, and just leave?
Yeah, you can say, actually, I'm going to take a different train, right? That's how you diffuse it and leave. Yeah, and it's about public safety, right? So if you're coming off the train, but if you haven't entered the train yet, like you're free to leave because you're paying to get in. One of the good suggestions we had is about carrying phone numbers.
Yeah, so like I went to school in Virginia, and one of the big aspects was, if something happened to me in Virginia where I have no family or no relatives or no really close friends, what do I do? Like, who do I call? My mom is 7 hours away. How is she gonna get to me? Who's gonna help? And one of the things that we brought up when we were brainstorming about this was to always keep phone numbers with you that are really important, because and like not just for yourselves, but for people who are younger. Like I have a niece and 3 nephews, and it's like if something were to ever happen with them, I would want them to be able to contact me or contact someone in the family who happens to be an attorney or something like that. But to always keep numbers that are really, really important on your persons, whether they're in your wallet or in your pocket or something. So when you get to arraignments or when you get to wherever and you get your phone call, you're able to actually call someone who can help.
I'll go back to
That's
when
it.
it comes into the subway, right? Then they say, I'm sorry, I have to leave. Now, if the officer at that point goes and grabs him and say finds contraband, will that be thrown out?
They'd have to, yeah, if you didn't consent to the search, if your consent was by leaving, I mean, I can't tell you, right? I can't get specific legal advice.
Should be thrown out if you could prove that?
I think that if you can prove that they didn't have a reasonable suspicion to stop you, which might then give rise to probable cause to search you, then sure, right? But it depends on the circumstances. The only thing that we can tell you blanket is that if you're entering the subway and you see that table, right, and you're like, they might randomly stop me, and you can turn around and walk away, even if they're like summoning you over.
One question I have going back to, what point does an officer have a right to touch you? One of the illustrations shows the officer grabbing the young lady by the arm. At what point does an officer have a right to do that?
Right, that was in the frisk part, right? So I mean the cartoons are a little exaggerated, obviously, but this is if they have reasonable suspicion, right? They have a reasonable suspicion, something more than a hunch, just to keep you there, then they can frisk you. They can do a pat down over your clothes. They shouldn't be. Listen, if I'm a defense attorney, or I'm gonna touch Maurice with his permission, right? And if I grab him and I'm an officer, my cuffs are out, my gun is on my hip, like my analysis, this is an arrest. This is a detention. Like I'm not free to leave. I'm under arrest, and they better have probable cause to be doing that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was a little confused about that too. So I thought that between detention and the frisk, they had to have a reason to fear for their safety in addition.
No,
That's not true.
No, it's not true. If they have reason to detain you, that reasonable suspicion, they can frisk you.
Okay.
Not search, right? The search is the pocket. On the frisk, if they feel this in my pocket and they're like, that could be a knife or a gun, then they're allowed to go in that pocket. But that, they'd have to also feel it on all the other pockets to go inside. But the pat down, that's part of the detention. It's part of the reasonable suspicion.
Usually never
Thanks for
happens
clarifying.
that way. It usually happens like the frisk and the search is normally like squished together. Yeah, one thing. But yeah, they're supposed to be two separate.
Two separate things. There's 4 levels that we kind of smush into 3 here. So.
What about women's pocketbooks? Because most of us carry pocketbooks.
Sure. They can't. That's not a pat down. That's not a pat down, right? So if you're being detained, they can't go in your pocketbook, and they shouldn't go in your pocketbook unless they have probable cause once they've arrested you too to suspect that there's some kind of contraband or something that could harm them, right? So yeah. So keep your pocketbook zipped too.
Same thing as someone's wearing a book bag.
Yeah, same thing with the book bag. But keep stuff zipped, right? I mean, how many times you see kids on the subway with like women? It's usually people visiting, right? But like with unzipped pocketbooks and like things sticking out, like. Just like don't give your name and number. Don't leave your stuff open to that maybe happening. The other thing too is arraignments. One of the reasons we talk about carrying phone numbers on you is because now we live in this world where everything is in our phones, and so many people, arraignments don't have a number to call. It also helps to hopefully mitigate. Our goal is to keep you feeling safe and keep you centered in your rights. And if you know that you've got some numbers of people that you can call to make sure they can check in on you, that's going to help too. So that's just one of our kind of like. Not legal advice, but real world advices. Arraignments, you go through within 48 hours. The rest arraignment time used to be getting up to 48 hours, which is the New York limit. It's actually, I don't know what the most recent numbers are, but Brooklyn and Bronx have the longest wait. And I know as of like 4 years ago, it was still 36 hours average from arrest on the street or in your home until you meet your attorney. I think it's down significantly. I think it's closer to probably like 27 hours in my experience. And sometimes if it's a slow day, I'll see people that were arrested like 10 hours before. I'm gonna whip through these special concerns, but these are common sense, but obviously immigration is a huge thing, okay? We only have 5 minutes, so we're just gonna put this out here. If your immigration status is other than citizen or even resident, you should know that going into these situations when you're deciding what rights to invoke and how to protect yourself. Same thing with open warrants, and by warrants we mean 10 years ago when you were a teenager, you were walking through the park at night and you got a summons ticket and you never answered it. Guess what? You have an open warrant. Same thing with open criminal cases. That will absolutely probably land you back in arraignments, not getting one of the other tickets. You'll probably come through and be an attorney. If you're licensed by the state, right? Maybe you're a daycare worker or you're a healthcare professional, you're a teacher, you got fingerprinted when you got licensed to work. The minute you get arrested, you get fingerprinted, right? And that alerts Albany, and so your job is going to know, and you're probably going to be suspended during the pendency of your case, even while you're presumed innocent. We talked about identifying as transgender or gender nonconforming. This can be a real problem. A lot of times officers, in my experience, will just go by whatever's on your ID. If people haven't gotten their IDs to match the gender that they identify as, that can be a problem. You can be in the wrong cells. New York City jails recently are now saying there's always been a transgender holding cell at Rikers, but now the idea is that you get to go, much like New York City bathrooms, you go to the bathroom, you get to choose the holding area that you identify with. But it's a particularly vulnerable population, especially going through. If you end up being held at Rikers. And of course, people with disabilities, same issues, right? It's funny to say, but central booking is not very handicap accessible, right? There's stairs everywhere, there's elevators, but that will also kind of change your interactions and your calculations when you're dealing with officers on the street. Okay, here's the real quick rundown. So it's not just arrest. Does everyone know about summons tickets? The pink summons tickets, all right, it looks like this. All right, it's like that carbon copy. It's really easy to lose, and if you lose it and forget where you're supposed to go, you end up with a warrant, which means you're going to come through and meet me in arraignments the next time you get one. I'm serious. Like if you have a park after dark ticket and you get stopped for riding your bike on the sidewalk, right? You don't get another ticket for that if you never answered your first. You come through arraignments. But they are mostly for violation charges, disorderly conduct, park after dark, dog without a leash we see all the time, open container of alcohol. Right? They're given at or near the site of arrest. So this is when you're being detained and you see your officers writing tickets. This happens right there. You have to report in person to the court on the date that's scheduled. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. which is usually written in pretty terrible handwriting. I have terrible handwriting too. And it's usually answerable in Manhattan. You're not fingerprinted. You're not fingerprinted for a summons, okay? It's a summons ticket. You can actually answer it by paying a fine too, usually. And you can actually check, if you lose that carbon piece of paper, you can check it online at mysummons.nyc, right? I keep going the wrong way, sorry. Okay, so the next one, if you don't get a summons ticket, right, then you could still get a desk appearance ticket. So a desk appearance ticket, you actually go down to the precinct. This is not given on the street. You go down to the precinct. Oh, sorry, still have demonstration stuff in here. If you're getting arrested while protesting, that's usually at one police plaza. You have to have a government-issued ID. This is where, like, you don't have to give this to them, but if you don't have an ID with some way they can verify your address, you're not going to get a desk appearance ticket, even though you might otherwise be eligible. You have to have an address, because a desk appearance ticket means you get released from the precinct, they take down your information, and then the district attorney writes up the charges and mails you your next court date. So you have to be able to be reached. These are some of the reasons that you wouldn't get one. You are fingerprinted and photographed, because it's about verifying your identity to say that, okay, we don't need to talk about bail with a judge. We'll let you go with this desk appearance ticket, which looks like that normally. I know that's not a very clear picture. This is what you'll get in the mail. So if you move, you need to go check the DAT part, go to your court and see when your desk appearance ticket is due, because if not, what do you get? You get a warrant. All right. And then central booking and arraignment. So there's Brooklyn Criminal Court. It's no longer than 72 hours. That's like the federal limit. Like I said, most people right now are coming through, I think, in about 28 hours. You'll receive the services of a public defender at arraignments. You can also call your own attorney, but I represent people who can't afford legal representation. But if that's not you, if you make more than me, congratulations, it's not that hard. And I will still represent you at arraignments, and then we ask that you retain your own attorney, all right? I really think that the public defenders and the folks that we work with are some of the best folks I know, and the folks that know the criminal defense world, because we're in it every single day, right? At arraignments, that's when the judge makes a bail determination. So you've been fingerprinted, you've been photographed, you had your eyes scanned, right? There's an iris scan that happens just before you see the judge. Your public defender, your defense attorney has told you the charges, and then you're gonna go see the judge, and they are supposed to make a determination as to whether or not you go free. Maybe you go with supervised release, which is a new initiative to have people check in with social workers but remain at liberty, or perhaps bail gets set. So that's a whole other workshop, right? But that's the third way. And we always say, you don't forget the rights, right? You're clearly being detained if you're going to Rikers Island or to Brooklyn House, to one of the detention centers. But it doesn't mean that you give up all your rights. Rikers phone calls are recorded, right? So again, why are you talking to anyone other than your attorney about your case? You shouldn't be. You still have the right to remain silent. There are still jailhouse informers. There's still ways that the officers are investigating your case and trying to build a case against you. So best practice remains to stay silent, all right? And always ask to speak to your lawyer. I think that brings us to the end. Yep, questions and context. So we've had a lot of questions. I think we're done. If you have more questions, we can stick around for a few minutes. Thank you all so much for your participation and your engagement.
So thank you. What a wonderful audience. So much participation. For everybody watching, I'm sorry, some of the questions, they really weren't appropriate to be repeated. There was some role play. We hope that you caught most of it. And if anybody has ideas for future programs, generally our programs repeat. Now with Facebook Live, they're not necessarily going to have to repeat because it's already now, people can access it on the Brooklyn Bar Association Facebook page. But if you have ideas for programs, we do. We have done in the past, landlord-tenant, matrimonial, elder law, consumer debt, bankruptcy, condominium law, co-op law, landlord-tenant, know your rights, all different know your rights programs. And this wonderful one with Brooklyn Defenders, I think there could be a follow-up, and I look forward to speaking to Brooklyn Defenders. Again, we want the content to be somewhat different, but when I first spoke with Brooklyn Defenders on this, we put together this program. If anybody has any particular questions or suggestions for future programs, the Brooklyn Bar Association Foundation Law Committee is dedicated to providing these programs for the public. So please let us know. My name is Fern Finkel. I am the chair of the program. You could find me. I'm very easy to find. There's only 2 Fern Finkels in the country, and we are friends. And it's Finkel and Fernandez. I'm here at 16 Court Street, ffinkel@ffelderlaw.com. You could send me an email. You could call me and say, I have a great suggestion for a program, and let's see what we could do. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. And a safe evening. And stay silent.
Sorry.